Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Carl Carlson.
Hey, Carl. I got an interesting question I think it was it through LinkedIn or email? It was email, I think. And I don't know. It was actually through the About page on Ascendo. So that little tagline we do at the end of the show.
It's working.
It's working. Somebody listened to it. But I don't know all the details. It was very, quick email conversation back and forth, but they're working with a facility, a plant that has maintenance teams supporting their production line and that kind of scenario set up. And they're learning about preventative maintenance. They've already installed and have been using oil analysis on their gearboxes and equipment. And instead of replacing the oil or doing maintenance on this rotating equipment on a schedule, they shifted to condition-based monitoring of the oil. And when the oil analysis says, hey, we got to do something here, they go deal with it. And that's a step up, an improvement in a lot of different ways. And they said they're also, if something's not crucial but needs attention, or they do an inspection when they take the equipment down to change the oil because the analysis says it's time, they take that opportunity to update other things or align other things or replace or repair things. And they still have corrective maintenance, when an unexpected downtime occurs, and they have scheduled maintenance and they have conditional maintenance. And there's a lot of terms. And the gist of the question is that they've imposed, the operating manager or the plant manager said, well, this is great. Let's have a metric on the team that I want 30% corrective maintenance and 70% preventative maintenance. That's your goal as a team. And the person asking the question to me was, we need to define what preventative is and what corrective is, because they're starting to reclassify different things so they can meet their target. They're changing, just because we did an inspection and it was on a schedule, even though it's technically a corrective maintenance because you didn't expect it to occur, they're going to call it preventative maintenance because it was scheduled downtime to go and do the inspection. And
of course, we're not surprised.
Yeah. And my basic answer to him was, at first, he didn't tell me about this metric. I said, why do you need to know the terms of these things? It sounds like you got a pretty decent program going there, double down on doing the root cause analysis and preventative maintenance and longer term stuff like that. And he goes, yeah, we're working on that. But now we have this metric that is altering people's behavior about what they call things. They're gaming the system is the term I would use for it. And I was like, is that really the outcome this operations manager wanted?
I can't imagine it would be, but on the other hand, I've seen so often that metrics become a numbers game. We used to say, and it was driven into me for years and years, if you don't measure it, it won't happen. Mm-hmm. And there's some degree of truth to that. But the question is, what do you do with the metric? And if you put too much force on meeting the metric goals, then human nature is to find ways to achieve them that are not necessarily what you want. I ran into this with what's called RPN thresholds, risk priority number in an FMEA. And then companies for years would put a threshold on it. You may not have more than 80 RPN, Mr. Supplier or Mrs. Supplier. Right. You can't ship it if you have anything over 80. Well, sure enough, everything was below 80.
Yeah, 79.
It didn't add any value. Yeah, exactly. It didn't add any value to the product, but they found ways to get it underneath that threshold. And the ratio of corrective to preventive, and it's not the first time I've heard this, I think is vulnerable to the same type of numbers game.
Yep. Yeah. And it was one where they were struggling with the signal that this is a numbers game now, or a game, was, well, if it was scheduled downtime and we found something that needed repairing, we're going to call that something else. Or, it's like we're going to squish what we think these definitions are so that we get more preventative classifications. And I was like, and we've heard about balanced scorecards and KPIs and all these other things. And oftentimes it's like, well, if that is the game and you want more preventative maintenance, it's usually, for me, it would be, well, what is it you really want? Is it just more uptime? You want more cost-effective maintenance? Do you want, less unscheduled downtime, less downtime completely? What is it you're really looking for? And it's probably got nothing to do with maintenance. It's probably due to quality of the product or throughput, or cost, budgeting. What is the underlying real thing? And then how do we connect that in a way that we have 1, 2, or 5 measures that balance it out, so that we're not looking at just cost cutting and pushing the problems down the road.
I agree there. Starting with the objectives. What are you looking for? I think that's a good idea. Let me also bring in that the quality of the tasks. So you have preventive maintenance tasks, you have corrective maintenance tasks, and of course there's other types of tasks. And what matters most is the quality of those tasks, because they're not all equal. You can have preventive maintenance that doesn't add a lot of value, but you could check a box that it's a task done.
Well, you see that a lot did you do the preventative maintenance checks? Did you run this, did you do these 5 things to this piece of equipment? And it's check, 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 check. And I had one team that they said, he just pencil whips it. He goes, gets a coffee, and he doesn't do anything. So the quality of it was done, but he does the paperwork, so he gets credit for doing it. And it's a problem.
No, yeah, for sure. The principles involved are so important, like you were bringing out there, and putting the thought into what tasks are needed. And when I do RCM projects, reliability centered maintenance, I use techniques that are well known, which is probably outside the scope of this podcast, but there are really good techniques, a lot of literature, a lot of good books, and even some good standards on RCM. And I usually use some form of FMEA as part of it, but it's a sort of a modified, I'll call it a maintenance FMEA. But the key is to get the logic right and to deliberate on and to understand the failure distributions if things are failing, how do they fail, so you can then select the right tasks. And it's getting the right tasks that is so important. I remember a story going back a number of years, working with a Navy, Chesapeake, Virginia, a submarine unit. And I was not on the submarine, but of course this was in the design side. And one of the questions had to do with the blower motor, which is really important, obviously, when you're on mission in a submarine, that you have circulating fresh air. And the question was, should we what's the strategy? Should we let the blower motor run to failure? Well, of course, if you're out undersea and then it fails,
you're under the ice cap or something like that.
Yeah, you got a lot of problems, because you have to get to it can be a problem. And then what do we do? Do we obviously we want to design a better motor that lasts a long time, but then how often do we inspect? Do we inspect in dry dock? All those things go into an RCM program and have to be thought through with the right inputs, the right criticality, and the right understanding of the mission that you have, which can be in a plant or it could be at sea. And what I'm getting at is the tasks are not what's the word? Uniform in terms of their value.
Yep.
Some tasks might be minor, some might be very critical. And so these metrics that sort of divide one by the other add maybe a little bit of value if you look at them, but don't add a lot of value. And they can be misused.
Yeah, no, I mean, on the face of it, you're thinking, well, this plant manager wants to have more preventative maintenance. It's a good thing, and if we can prevent problems, that's a good thing. So let's encourage more preventative maintenance. But I think it goes back to what you mentioned, Carl, is that if that's the driving thing and it's reinforced, and and the team starts playing games on it, that's the time to say we're missing something here. We're not balancing this out correctly. We don't want to ignore corrective maintenance because we still need to keep the line running, or defer it. And so that if I don't, one of the things he said they did is that caught his attention was that they had a piece of equipment that was a seal broke on it, and it was leaking oil, but not critically. So they decided to schedule preventative maintenance on it later in the day, and called it preventative maintenance because they scheduled it for 2:00 in the afternoon rather than fixing it on the spot when they noticed it. It was
not good.
Right, that's
the numbers game. You're describing the numbers game, and if you put too much pressure on a team to come in with certain numbers, then the team will naturally try to find ways to be helpful, if I could use that word, and help you achieve your numerical goal.
But let's say you're not the plant manager. And as the impression I got, this was a reliability engineer or a maintenance engineer that was on that in this group, and notices this. What can they do? How do you overcome this such that, one, you don't throw your colleagues under the bus for trying to do what the boss wants, but how do you get to a point where you actually are benefiting the operations of that facility without playing a numbers game? What can a person do in that situation?
An interesting project, and I haven't done this, and so I'm just exploring it with you, is to identify on the RCM side the quality objectives. And you brought up objectives earlier. Mm-hmm. What are the quality objectives of an RCM outcome? And let me just take 1 minute or less and talk about this from an FMEA standpoint, where I have done quality objectives. So people ask, when is an FMEA done, or how do you know the FMEA is valuable? And they say, well, don't we have to wait until you've produced the product, and then a number of years later you look at the warranty? And I go, well, you can't wait that long when you're looking at the quality of an FMEA. So we developed what's called quality objectives, and there's 10 of them, and I'll just go over one of them or two of them. One of them is, does the FMEA drive product design improvements if it's a DFMEA, mm-hmm. or process improvements if it's a process FMEA? And that's really easy to assess, because you look down the recommended actions and see if you're actually improving the product by doing the recommended actions.
If you're just doing a bunch of testing at the end of the line, you haven't changed the product at all.
Exactly. And so so that would meet that quality objective. And so there's a set of those. Is the FMEA done during the right timing? If you do it real late, then it doesn't add a lot of value. If you do it earlier, it adds more value. Mm-hmm. And so those quality objectives work really well for assessing the quality of the FMEA. And we could do the same thing for RCM and maintenance and develop a set of quality objectives. And then now we can look at, is that RCM project really a good quality project or not? Is it actually adding value, as opposed to focusing on metrics that can be adjusted too easily, like divide preventive by corrective. And maybe you want a ratio of 6, and you're doing good if you get that. That's not going to get you a high quality product.
Yeah, and the hard part, and I've run into this a couple of times, where maintenance managers are saying, I don't have time to go inspect everybody's, job. I've got 20 people out working on this, that, and the other thing, and even if I spot check it, that's too much time. I need to trust my team to actually execute the repairs correctly. And I get that. I think there's trust and training and setting expectations and stuff that plays a role in that. Yet what I found, and this is just me as a statistician looking at the data, going, if you're back out to that piece of equipment 6 times in a week, doing essentially the same thing, maybe we're not emphasizing root cause analysis here enough. Maybe there's some other systemic thing that's causing this to go bad very often, or what can we learn here? But that wasn't anybody's metric or any goal. But when I tied it to the overall downtime, if we could fix it right the first time, then we're not out there 6 times in the same week trying to sort out the same problem. That got their attention. And so it was kind of fixed right the first time, and then look at repeated calls to that equipment or piece, failure mechanism, whatever. But that was still another measure. And there's a balance of, well, if I want to fix it right the first time, it might take me a week of downtime to really understand it and sort it out and get the right parts. Well, the plant manager's not going to accept that.
Yeah, and don't. Yeah, I agree. And don't get me wrong. And I don't mean just you, Fred, but if people are listening, there's nothing wrong with having metrics. It's how you use them. And you've said this forever, Fred. How do you use the results of a project? How do you use the data?
Yep.
And so I wouldn't mind seeing a metric of prevention divided by corrective type tasks, just to see how it's looked at. I see how it's going, but only as one of many things to look at, and not too much pressure put on that as a metric. Otherwise, you get into the numbers game. It's kind of like control charts. Control charts can be really good if you know what to do with them.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
if you don't know what to do.
Yeah. If you're just filling them out and ignoring the out of control situation because the emphasis is on keep it running. I've seen that before.
Imagine if you said nobody would do this, but imagine you said, okay, your pay is going to be correlated to your control chart.
Oh no, I saw something exactly like that, Carl. I was in a factory.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. No, it was shift by shift. Their bonus was part tied to their uptime, by shift.
Okay. So imagine all the ways somebody can achieve uptime. Without
defer everything.
Product.
Everything was deferred to the next shift.
Yes.
Even though they have professed that they did preventative maintenance, they did all these good things and everything else. I went to like 3 different shift handovers, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this one over here is starting to sound a little wonky." And I was like, "Wait a sec, it's smoking. it's about ready to catch on fire. Why didn't you shut that down?" And but no, there's a great big wall chart that showed the uptime instantaneously on that line by shift, and all 3 shifts were listed there, and they got points basically for their quarterly bonuses based on who was number 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, oh my God! And I've seen a plant, and I don't mention names here, where they're focused on safety, so they keep track of safety incidents, and of course the goal is 0.
Right.
And somebody pinches their finger. Well, that's not a safety incident.
It's no big deal.
No big deal. So you got to be careful about that. But we only have a few minutes left. And what can we do? A very common scenario is you're introducing a maintenance program into a plant or managing assets that is mostly corrective. They've not been preventive, but everybody's busy. And of course they're busy because they're fixing things that have problems more often than they would have if we had prevented. But you're in that environment. So what can you do as a maintenance person to, in the middle of this, like if the train's already going at 100 miles an hour, how do you change the process, the maintenance tasks in the middle of all that, so you get benefit? Any thoughts on the advice we give people?
Yeah, the one you're talking about is the quality of the work being done. And even in a corrective maintenance realm, getting the repair or the fix or the adjustment right the first time, that helps. But if you want to improve condition-based monitoring or preventative maintenance, is carve out 1 or 2 things that are examples of preventative maintenance, and then document that line now, that prototype, that piece of equipment now has less downtime, right? Or better quality throughput or whatever. Is what's important to the plant? Is it throughput? Is it cost? Is it, quality of the product being produced, or whatever it is? But connect the benefit of the FMEA or the preventative maintenance or the condition-based maintenance, even if it's just a pilot or a prototype. Carve out a little bit of space to show it, but then document the connection to the bigger picture. And then there might be other metrics and measures to connect to it, but it's what's the big picture. And if you can connect it to that, it starts to show to the powers that be, basically, that this is useful. We need to double down on it.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. And so you're basically introducing some quality objectives into the work, and then carving out some time to do a better job. That'll get better effectiveness of the corrective actions,
right?
And that have to be done. And then another thing you could do, and it's an investment, and it literally is an investment, because it's going to take some time up front, but you have to set aside some time or some team to work on the future program prevention tasks. In other words, an FMEA or a maintenance FME that supports RCM, that drives the right preventive actions that are high quality, that gets introduced into the plant. You can't just let everything run all the time in a corrective mode. So yeah, there's definitely things that should be done, but we want to avoid the numbers game.
Yeah. And there's also just, you've got all this data now, assuming the data is collected and honest, clearing, which it probably isn't. But look at it going, these 15 things, if we did preventative maintenance once a month, we would avoid these 15 problems. You could do predictive based on actual data saying, these kinds of failures, the nature of those failures are such that we can avoid those. If we get 1 hour a week to properly lubricate this equipment, that won't happen. We won't see.
So prioritize, and essentially the 80-20 rule, where you're focusing on the vital few that get the most.
Well, there's some things like a forklift drives into the side of your equipment. Setting up barriers and doing training and so on will help, but hopefully it doesn't happen too often. Those are hard to prevent, is like lubrication, it would be, or monitoring your lubrication. And going back to this one scenario that this listener pointed out, it was like we're doing condition-based monitoring of our oil, and we change oil and do the maintenance on that equipment when the oil tells us it needs to be done, which has given them some great benefits. Is connect that to that process, that it's connected to those quality objectives, those important things that are there, and show that it doesn't really matter if you call it corrective or preventative or condition-based monitoring. If the end result is you get a stable, consistent, quality running facility, that's the overall objective. It's not making
that's the objective.
Metric. Yeah.
I bet our listeners have some ideas also on this subject, and if people have stories to share with us, we'd love to hear them on this whole subject of the right way to do things and the numbers game that can introduce the wrong behaviors, and particularly in the maintenance of assets.
Yeah.
So how do they get in touch with us?
Well, Carl, you've certainly heard this like 150 times. Head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. A couple of ways there. Plus, Carl and I and the other hosts are available through LinkedIn or our About pages. And I want to shout out thanks to and I'm drawing a complete blank on the name, for sending this question over. We traded a few emails, and hopefully you got a reasonable approach going forward. And always, Carl, when I talk to you about these kinds of questions, it's like, I need to write them another note saying, here's some more ideas for you. So hopefully, if you've got a question, if you're listening and you got a question, let us know. We'll try to respond to you as soon as we can and give you some advice or try to understand what you're dealing with and help you out. But they also usually make a good podcast for us. So we do really appreciate your input, questions, and ideas.
Ditto.
All right. Thanks, Carl. We'll talk to you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. And
you too, Fred.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check what metrics my wife has in store for me today.
Outstanding. You got the right approach.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.